Right, so this is a lesson about discontinuous change. We are in an era of discontinuous change, and students that leave university, schools, will enter a reality that is very different from my reality when I was young. We've got this discontinuous change, and they will need certain competencies that maybe I didn't need when I left school, and my parents or grandparents didn't need to deal with this discontinuous change. Now, first of all, we've got to answer, what is discontinuous change? So, discontinuous change is change which really changes the assumptions that we have, and so the fundamental assumptions, and so create a completely new reality, a completely new paradigm, way of looking at the world, way of seeing reality, if you like. All the old assumptions go and new assumptions emerge. So continuous change is when, we maybe things do change, but in a very predictable way, and a way that is very just in a continuous way, that is just a continuation of the past. So, for example, a big company's getting bigger is continuous change, but maybe a tiny company like Tesla was entering an industry of huge companies and becoming the leader over a few years. This is discontinuous change, when things change very fundamentally. We can think of the old assumptions of the reality now, which is that oil is very important. In the future, it won't be important. It will be wind and sun and technologies which help share those renewable energies that are important. And the Middle East won't be so important either, as it is now. And this will be a discontinuous change. Normally we have a paradigm based on stories from the past, symbols, power structures, organizational structures, control systems, and rituals and routines. Let's think of the Constitution. The Italian Constitution has a paradigm, and that's basically all the assumptions we have in the fundamental principles. That human rights are important, solidarity is important, democracy is important, being international is important. All these assumptions that are fundamental to Italy, and they're all reinforced by the organisational structures and power structures and stories of the Second World War, and symbols of, I don't know, the liberation of Italy, and rituals and routines. The days off we get on April the 25th, for Victory Day, the control systems. So, like, for example, the Parliament, which is, doesn't have it's only got the sovereignty with the permission of the people. So the sovereignty belongs to the people, etc. The organisational structures, you've got, the separation of powers, etc. So that all reinforces this paradigm, which, And when discontinuous change comes along, the whole thing is turned on its head. Um, Discontinuous change can be on a global or a market level or even a national level. So for example, IKEA is an example of discontinuous change in an industry. They suddenly started making furniture, not in a factory, but in people's homes. They gave instructions and tools to do that, and made it easy for people to build their own furniture. And suddenly that disrupted the whole industry. Before IKEA, we had lots and lots of furniture shops, very small shops often, family-owned shops. Suddenly, IKEA came along and disrupted the whole industry. Or it could be on a national level. For example, the Italian Constitution really turned the Italy on its head. So instead of one man having the power, it was all the people who had the power, and the leaders didn't have the power. They had to do as they're told. The sovranità appartiene al popolo. So that was a very big change on a national level, a discontinuous change. The internet is another example of discontinuous change on a global level. This has disrupted all the organisation of the internet and changed all of the globe and changed all the assumptions in many, many ways. So we can see that this discontinuous change is coming on many levels, and we are going to have to react. Or the students who leave the schools and the universities are going to have to deal with this discontinuous change and maybe have an approach which will make it to their advantage and not to their disadvantage. Generally, with discontinuous change, you initiate the discontinuous change, and then it can be to your advantage. If you just react to discontinuous change, generally you will be put in a weaker and weaker position until you really have no role at all. So this discontinuous change is very important, their approach, their competence. And how do students react to this discontinuous change? First, we're going to look a bit deeper about discontinuous change and why it happened. So we've got disruptive technologies. For example, the internet and tiny phones as computers and cheap computers themselves and solar panels. If we think about Africa, before they needed an industrial revolution, they needed a telephone network and power stations to have an industrial revolution. Now, many Africans can just have little phones, a computer and a solar panel, and organise markets for their food, for their farms, and organise different ways of doing things, reconfigure maybe join resources, share tractors, whatever. Access the outside world, access markets abroad. Before they were really excluded. Now they don't need their industrial revolution because technology has created the opportunities for Africa. That's incredible change. But also globalization can bring discontinuous change. Let's think, before the latest globalization, before the internet, we were very organized as states. Within, we had established a reality and just become very static and just created more and more, deeper and deeper establishment of certain assumptions. Once you get globalization, once you get countries connecting and collaborating, becoming interdependent and interconnected, things really are shaken up. Things become very dynamic. Suddenly you've got new markets, new sources of products, new job opportunities, new products. You have new ways of doing things. Suddenly change happens continuously in a very radical way, in a very fundamental way. So globalization has really meant we've had to open up our minds and see how things can be done and are done in different ways, and reconfigure our systems to make something work better with the outside world, if you like. So globalization, new ways of thinking. It's brought new ways of thinking, but also it's meant we've had to change to integrate into a global economy, global society even. I'd say there's a global culture and everything's become global. Global politics, etc. Now, another reason for discontinuous change is innovation. Just think of the cryptocurrencies. That was an innovation. Suddenly sovereign currencies weren't they didn't have a monopoly on money. Money could be made by private individuals and private organizations and developed and given value and used as money. That's an incredible innovation that really has revolutionized the financial industry in some ways. In the future, it could be climate change which creates this discontinuous change. With serious climate issues, we will have problems and opportunities. Big changes will come. You may even see, hopefully not, but we may even see Holland disappear. Think about that. What change that would bring. The people in Holland, suddenly they have to leave where they live. Incredible change. Hopefully that will never come into fruition. Okay, now we're going to look at how to approach this discontinuous change. The European Union has given key competencies for lifelong learning to be taught in every school. Now, the first four are normal, competencies that we teach, like maths and languages. Language is very important, science. But then there are some later ones which are specifically to adjust to this environment of discontinuous change. For example, personal, social, and learning to learn competence. Obviously, if things change very radically and very quickly, we're going to have to be able to learn all the time, adjust all the time. For example, if there's a lot of innovation in medicine, because we've got billions of new doctors in the world from Africa, from wherever, in developed economies that learn from Harvard on global courses, there's going to be updating all the time, a continual updating and training on new medicines and new techniques and new approaches. So there's going to be need for learning to learn. We can see that in teaching all the time. Now in Italy, there must be formazione in every school every year. There's always new software and apps to learn. I don't know, the introduction of AI, this changes a lot. Ideas change a lot. So this learning to learn is what's important. I mean, maybe you learn French, but maybe you don't need French. Maybe you join a company and suddenly they have a big, important relationship with China, and they say, look, we've got to learn Chinese. So you're going to have to know how to learn a language in the best possible way for you. And that means not just going to a course, but being able to learn. I mean, you could just use AI, and AI could teach you the grammar and you do the practice. But you really need to know how to learn in the best possible way, in your best possible way. It's very personalised, and that could be very important to companies that are finding new markets and new partners and new customers and new sources of resources. We need that learning to learn, and not just learning, but being good learners. So that's got to be transmitted somehow. Then there's self-awareness and self-regulation. In a very discontinuous change environment, you've got to be able to change and to control yourself, be self-disciplined, know how to regulate your emotions, be self-aware, understand the mood of the room and adjust to it, and then be able to manage time and information, things like that, working with others. Remember, it's all about initiation with discontinuous change. Ideas won't be coming from the top. There are going to be lots of ideas coming from everybody. In the school now, maybe the president doesn't know all the initiatives that are happening and all the partnerships we're making with other schools or with museums and all the different activities or new approaches that are happening. She's not there to organise it all and tell us all what to do. We must be the ones to initiate. And so we've got to be able to manage our time and information and work with others and stay resilient. I mean, discontinuous change means that we're going to have to put up with an environment where there's no certainty and there's lots of ambiguity and precariousness, feelings of insecurity. So we need to be able to stay resilient, and the organisation, make the organisation we work within resilient to discontinuous change. Okay, so this is very important. Learning to learn and developing a kind of self-awareness and regulation, being able to adjust and adapt and be mobile. Another core competence is citizenship, which we're doing in our Educazione Civica. This is very important in discontinuous change because it's not going to be all about the old left and right. There's going to be much more new ideas. I just think of Grillo and Cinque Stelle, which came up with completely different ideas, direct democracy on the internet, and we've got to be able to understand how things work and would they work. We can't just comfortably sit in our comfortable certainties of left or right. We've got to really be able to confront new ideas and maybe fake news and overcome fake news, because in this discontinuous change all our certainties, and we will become very disoriented. What is right and wrong. The press may be easily manipulated with stories coming from everywhere, etc. So we've ourselves got to understand society, democracy and rights and peace and how to get to peace. Otherwise we will vote for things and then be surprised at the consequences, like Brexit. Brexit really surprised many people because they didn't think those consequences would happen, even though they were predicted. Or Trump has become a very big surprise, and maybe it wouldn't be such a surprise if we had understood how things worked more, and you know all the antibodies in our system and how they worked, like separation of power and its importance, etc. This is what people fail to understand, because we do see, and that was predicted even by Trump, he will take on the executive power, make the executive power the complete power, the legislative, override the legislative power and ignore the judicial power. That was predicted, and people are yet surprised by it. So that's citizenship competence is very important. This discontinuous change will happen also with our political environment. Entrepreneurship. Now, entrepreneurship is the ability to turn ideas into action. It's not just going into business and managing a company. It's really about being able to see opportunities. With discontinuous change, there will come lots of opportunities, and take the initiative, have lots of ideas, and then be able to put them into practice and maybe know how to get the resources and take risks, and how how to bring change, if you like, and be proactive instead of just react to change. Maybe reacting to change would be an organisation that just every year change because of the environment changing, instead of trying to see opportunities where they could change the environment. That would be the proactive and initiative necessary in an era of discontinuous change. You have to do the changing and alter the environment rather than react to the change happening. Okay, lastly, there's the European competence of cultural awareness and expression. Now, this is all about being open-minded, being able to look at a different culture and different assumptions, different paradigms, and yet not judge it right or wrong. Have an open mind and look at things creatively. In an era of discontinuous change, you need to be open-minded. You can't be fixed in your assumptions and in your ways of looking at things. You really need to look at the differences, see the differences, and be able to have a reaction to those differences creatively, not in a very predictable, traditional way. Discontinuous change really means throwing tradition out the window, basically, and that is why we need cultural awareness and expression, cultural expression, because we can't just behave as if globalization isn't happening and disruption isn't happening. What happens with discontinuous change is that um, a competence will become very, very important, but you need to keep moving on, because that competence may be the cherry on an ice cream, but eventually it will become the vanilla. I'll give you an example. Graphic designers became the cherry on the ice cream when the websites exploded into the reality. You know, everyone wanted a website, they needed a graphic designer to design them. But slowly, we were able to find apps which could paint for us and do things and make things very easy. And the skill of graphic designing became vanilla. Nearly everyone could do it. So graphic designers had to reinvent themselves. They had to become ideas, you know, look into the marketing, what works, what is popular and what's not popular, because just the actual designing of something, the actual creation of a website became quite easy. Another example is translations. You know, translations early on in Italy was quite rare that you could find a translator, and they could ask, a lot of money, and they were very sought after and had lots of security. But after a while, it became less and less of a cherry on the ice cream and more like the vanilla, and then you have to specialize. So we got translators which were lawyers and they specialized in law, and translators which were specializing in other things, in other languages maybe, other than English. Always we've got to move on. This is the big problem in such discontinuous change. There's this movement. We've always got to be in movement, because otherwise we will get left behind. Right, so now what I want to do is talk about entrepreneurship. What is entrepreneurship? Basically, entrepreneurship or imprenditorialità is not what we're used to thinking it is. It is about having ideas and turning them, transforming reality with those ideas and putting those ideas into practice. That's particularly important in an era of discontinuous change, when lots of things are changing in a very discontinuous way. We've really got to be able, because there will be lots of opportunities, because change is happening on a fundamental level. The assumptions are changing, the paradigm. And so there'll be a lot of opportunities, and it's very important to recognise the diversity of opportunities. Now, first of all, let me just say, we're not talking about commercial. That can be used in this entrepreneurship can be used in a commercial context. But when the European key competencies, talk about entrepreneurship or imprenditorialità, they're talking about also the social context or the public context or any context, political context. We can even say, the Cinque Stelle, Grillo, was entrepreneurial, because they saw an opportunity to use technology, and they created a winning political party in the matter of months, with ideas, new ideas. very entrepreneurial. So it can be anything. And in fact, it needs to be everything, because everything is being impacted by discontinuous change. And there will be opportunities. So we do need this entrepreneurship, not just in the commercial world, in schools, in public administration, everywhere, in the third sector, in social life. Okay, so we do need creativity with this. You know, entrepreneurship becomes creativity, because we've got to have ideas. We've got to be able to be original and have this divergent thinking and this experimenting, thinking outside the box and trying things out, not worrying if it goes wrong, you know, making mistakes, not very in the traditional sense that the assumption is you make mistakes and that's a bad thing. You've got to perfect to the traditional way of thinking. But creativity is different. You need to experiment, and you could be wrong, and then you've got to start again. And that is very important in entrepreneurship. A lot of motivation and perseverance, because you're going to go wrong, and you've got to keep getting up and retrying and going back to the drawing board, and then mobilizing resources, you know, finding resources, meeting people, you know, trying to find ways of maybe raising money, or finding transportation, or meeting certain people with different skills, etc. Mobilizing, being persuasive, influencing people. That's mobilizing resources. So planning, yeah, you've got to be organized, and it's all about, you know, can you look at things in a long-term way? We're not talking about just an assignment or a competitive casa or a test. Can you do a project for 3 months with a big goal and plan? You know, that's what is really useful now. Having students come out of schools just with great ability to write an essay or do a homework in a couple of hours is not so important as being able to project something a bit bigger and something a bit more real. So and then coping with the uncertainty and the ambiguity and the risk. So there will be, with discontinuous change, there's not the certainty, there's no right or wrong. Sometimes, you know, things can be looked at different ways. There's no answers in the back of the book. You have to work things out, lay the road down on which you're traveling, if you like. Often with entrepreneurship, you are a pioneer. You're doing something that's completely different, in a different way, maybe. I'm just thinking, you know, like IKEA. IKEA produce furniture, but it said, you make it, here's the tools, here's the instructions, you do it at home. They did it in a completely different way. They didn't know, you know, if that was going to work or not. They had to probably had to find different ways of making it work. And it was a big risk, but it worked in the end. So, you know, there's no rule book, if you like. There's no plan to follow. With entrepreneurship, in this discontinuous change, we've got to cope with uncertainty and that ambiguity, which often young adolescents don't like. They want to be certain and they want clarity, and they don't like risk often, and that's not possible with entrepreneurship. Now, we've also got this spirit of initiative in the key competencies of the European key competence, because with discontinuous change, we've got to initiate change. There's this idea, this analogy of a boiling frog, which a frog put into a pan of water and heated up will just adjust to the different temperatures. And each time the temperature gets hotter, the frog doesn't jump out, it just adjusts to it until it's boiled. Now, obviously, it would have been better at some point to jump out. And that's the danger we have. As human beings, we tend to like our comfort and not like to change. Even when the temperature's going up, we try to adjust. And in that way, in the long term, we're finished. So it's better to make a change, to initiate the change, and to have this spirit of initiative and throwing ourselves into the dark. Like I said, entrepreneurship often means doing things in a different way, and the water, staying in the hot water, is kind of being traditional, whereas we need to jump out of that and have this spirit of initiative, and throw ourselves into the unknown. And so, we need this experimental approach to find what's appropriate and what works, because traditional solutions become not fit for the purpose. So that we've got to change, otherwise we're going to become the boiled frog. With the spirit of initiative, you do need courage. You do need to jump out into the unknown. You need to be experimental and proactive, not reactive to change. You've got to be able to adapt and be flexible and mobile. Maybe you do things wrong and you've got to change. You've got to be resourceful and creative, like I said before. Now, this is really important for orienting ourselves to this discontinuous change and to the modern environment. The key competencies in the European Union do mention this, do mention self-awareness, self-knowledge, and cultural awareness of others. So that's about emotional intelligence. So, first of all, what is emotional intelligence? So emotional intelligence is understanding and regulating your emotions. For example, are you worried, or maybe are you feeling insecure? And also those of others. So you recognise in them how they're feeling, and you're able to manage that. People connect on an emotional level much more, or before they do on an intellectual level. Overcoming emotional barriers and creating a constructive emotional environment is so important now, because teams are so important now. We'll go into why that's so important. But if there are problems normally in a team, normally it's on an emotional level, and the elements of a team really need to be able to connect and inspire each other and trust each other, and not just be competitive and think of themselves and not think of the interests of the team. So it's really important now to be able to work in a team to be able to connect and to collaborate. And that takes a lot of emotional intelligence that's fundamental. If you've got the emotional intelligence now in the modern world, you'll go far, because we are made of emotions more than knowledge and intellect. And those great intellectuals in the past, maybe they went into themselves very deeply, but could they cope in a modern environment, in a modern now we'll look at why these teamworks is so important. Why is it this emotional intelligence is so important? So, the importance of emotional intelligence. Now, if we look at the frontiers on anything, we can find great groups have replaced an individual genius. Many years ago, you got Einstein and Newton and all these really big, important discoverers. In the modern day, it's not like that. You have groups, like the Genome Project, thousands of scientists coming together. This is so important now. To connect and to collaborate is the way forwards. And to do that, you have to be able to connect emotionally first. Now, if we think of anything, like, for example, this ball in the picture, it's made all over the world by lots and lots of people. It's all, years ago, maybe that ball was made in one country. Now, it's made all over the world. But then we get to something as complex as the mobile phone. And we're talking about connecting and collaborating between millions of people. Millions of people coming together, getting the materials, all doing their little thing. Nobody knows how to make a mobile phone. We all know how to make little pieces. And, those societies that can connect and collaborate more than others are the ones that will really push forwards the frontiers. Those that are still in the command and control mentality, that's not enough anymore. So, first thing, we really need to know how to connect and collaborate. We need to have this idea of a flat structure to work together. We know in a hierarchical structure, the ideas come from the top and they flow down, and that will be very limited indeed. The person on the top won't have won't understand in the first person exactly what you're doing and the problems and possibilities. So we need a flat structure. Ideas in the modern work environment, very modern working environment, flow from everywhere. We want to have members of a group, a team, and each member of the team is on the same level. Maybe you've got a team leader, but they're still on the same level, and everybody can contribute in their way. So that's the idea. In a team you do projects and you work together on something, and then we can think in teaching. We work a lot in commissions to resolve problems or to analyse different aspects of the education, and then we reconfigure into another commission to do something else. So we don't really want this rigid hierarchical structure. We want a flat structure where people are on the same level and working very closely together as equals. Now, we also want, in the modern environment, creativity, diverse thinking, not just a team where all think very similarly. Because, you know, if you all think very similarly, you're not going to have ideas. You'll all be thinking in the same way. You know, maybe if it's very traditional to be strict in a classroom, all the teachers will come together and think, yeah, right, that's how we should do it. We should just punish this student as hard as we can, because they all think in the same way. But if you've got diversity in the team, you have a lot of ideas. So that's one thing. When we're talking about emotional intelligence, we've got to remember we want people to be more diverse. We want students to be more diverse, not just products of a sausage machine. We want to produce students which are able to think in different ways. Then you can have 1 + 1 = 2. If they're thinking in different ways, they're bringing different things. If they're thinking in the same way, you've got 1 + 1 = 1. You won't produce anything more than the same idea with more people, obviously. And then we can add our brains together. So with emotional intelligence, if we can come together as a diverse group, you do need emotional intelligence, because you're going to have to understand how others feel and really work closely together. It's a bit easier to work with people that think in the same way as you, because you're on the same in the same logic. But it's a lot more difficult to work with people that are very different from you. But in that way, you create a bigger brain together, and you're able to see things from a 360-degree vision. Okay, so you're not just seeing part of the problem, because others will see the other part of the problem. And you can use that diversity as a great benefit to the team. Okay, so, and that really does mean people come together. You can't have these Einsteins that go deeply into their thoughts and are, you know, able to think very, very deeply, but maybe not to connect and collaborate. We really need people who can connect and collaborate. And obviously in a team, you do need time to work things out and think deeply, but then you've got to be able to come together and listen and contribute and respond and add, etc. So you can't just be this genius that goes into their little world. So really this emotional intelligence is especially important. They say IQ has fallen behind EQ. EQ, which is emotional intelligence, is actually the most important element now, not IQ. Having big networks of diverse thinkers and able to collaborate is more important. And with this emotional intelligence, we can imagine that we can create a self-organizing network that can refigure, start, adapt, finish when it's natural. So with discontinuous change, you're going to have a lot of change. Hierarchies can't react One person can't keep on top of everything. He needs people at the front that take initiative to be able to work together and have lots of ideas and see opportunities. And this is how to deal with discontinuous change, with self-organising networks that reconfigure all the time and can see things in 360-degree ways and react appropriately.